Hello, everyone. We will get started in a moment. If the tech team could let me know when we are ready. Great. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone joining in person in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, and hello to our online audience. Welcome to our COP27 side event, Accelerating SDG7 Action, Implementing the UN Energy Plan of Action towards 2025 in support of the Global Roadmap for Accelerated SDG7 Action and Net Zero Emissions. My name is Ariel Alexevich, and I'm with the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and we're very happy you're here. We know that strong action towards achieving SDG7 is needed today more than ever. Fortunately, we have one of the outcomes of the high-level dialogue on energy in 2021, the Global Roadmap for Accelerated SDG7 Action. This provides invaluable guidance on the way forward. And today we'll hear from experts implementing the roadmap about how action is accelerating on the ground and how we can create an enabling environment for action. To start us off, we will see a video message from Mr. Lee Junhua, UN Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs.
Excellencies, distinguished participants, dear colleagues, it is my great pleasure to address this UN system-wide side event on energy and lend my voice to the important call for accelerated action on SDG7. Delivering on the Paris Agreement and on the 2030 Agenda will very much depend on the effective implementation of the just and equitable energy transition. The concrete and the practical milestones within the Secretary General's Global Roadmap for Accelerated SDG7 Action will help us to advance the transition. But we must act quickly. The UN Energy Plan of Action towards 2025 has helped rally UN system action in support of the implementation of the Global Roadmap. Guided by the plan, UN Energy facilitates, coordinates, and mobilizes the joint programs, policy analysis, capacity building, and advocacy and outreach. The UN Energy Secretariat at DESA will continue to strengthen its support to the UN Energy co-chairs, Mr. Arkin Stanner and Ms. Damilola Agundi, and its mobilization of expertise across the UN energy members and partners to implement this plan of action. The Energy Compact Action Network, supported by the UN Energy, will also play an important role to catalyze further actions and voluntary commitments through the Energy Compacts. Ladies and gentlemen, moving forward, the SDG7 review at the high-level political forum and the SDG summit next year present crucial opportunities to advance the achievement of SDG7 and the 2030 Agenda as a whole. We must leverage these opportunities to highlight the important synergies between the SDG7 and the climate agenda, and foster the types of cross-sectoral commitment and actions needed to make the meaningful progress on both fronts. Only through the cooperation and partnership with all stakeholders can we realize a sustainable, just, and equitable world which truly leaves no one behind for us and for future generations. I thank you.
Thank you, Undersecretary Lee, for that message. Now I would like to welcome Dr. Khalida Bouzar, UN Assistant Secretary General, Assistant Administrator, and Director of the Regional Bureau for the Arab States from UNDP.
Thank you very much, and sorry, my title is so long, I don't know it myself. Good morning or good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's really my pleasure to be with you today to this important event in the middle of the Climate Change Conference, providing one of the greatest opportunities in recent time to move the needle on the climate crisis. We have seen the science and we have seen the math, and we know our current action is just not adding up. We also know that our current energy system is one of the leading causes of the climate crisis, which hits the world poorest and most vulnerable the hardest. Countries around the world have put forward enhanced national pledges under the Paris Agreement, their NDCs, and we see that 100% of these pledges include a target on energy. This shows that it's a priority for every country. At the same time, last fall, for the first time in 40 years, the UN held a high-level dialogue on energy, which was a launchpad to achieve the energy transition and access-related goals. Both at the high-level dialogue and at COP26, there were increased commitment to step up ambition on ensuring access to clean energy and accelerating an energy transition that is just. We must now ensure that these commitments make good on their promises and are translated into concrete actions on the ground, especially in support on the most poor countries and the most vulnerable people. The benefit of a just energy transition and clean energy access are no longer a matter of debate. It's vital to create millions of new jobs, driving down poverty rate, including increasing food security, drastically reducing air pollution, and opening up an incredible array of new opportunities by making productive use of energy possible. In short, energy is an enabler and precondition for the successful implementation of our 2030 agenda and for also bringing dignity to millions of people. The energy transition is also key to deliver nearly 3/4 of the energy-related CO2 emission reductions needed to meet our climate goals. But let us be clear on the task ahead. Not only we are not currently on track to reach our 1.5 target, but we are also not on track to reach our SDG7 goals, even if, to be positive, we are heading in the right directions. The recent findings of the Tracking SDG Energy Progress Report show that if the current pace persists, only 92% of the world's population will be electrified by 2030, and only 72% of the population will have access to clean cooking in 2030. The global roadmap to accelerated SDG7 action emanating from the high-level dialogue on energy was released last November by the UN Secretary General himself. It lays out the critical milestones that need to be met to make a just transition a reality. The roadmap sets a very tight and aggressive timeline to ensure that 500 million more people gain access to electricity in 4 years, and 1 billion more people gain access to clean cooking conditions. For electricity alone, the annual investment must increase by 35 billion. So by 2030, the roadmap calls for tripling the annual investment for renewable energy and energy efficiency globally, as well as global renewable power capacity. These are very ambitious targets, but nobody can achieve this target alone. This is why we need to work together if we really want and mean to achieve them. To do so, we must significantly scale up efforts and lead by example. What does it mean? It means that it requires more than just stock taking and monitoring the progress made on our commitment. It means actively serving as a broker between different stakeholders, including, of course, member states, and linking country NDCs and their energy compact to a wider universe of action. UNDP is actively working to help countries turn their pledges into concrete action through our climate promise, which is the biggest offer among the UN. We are supporting over 120 countries to enhance, but also to implement their NDCs towards greater ambition. And it's, as I said, the largest offer of support to countries on NDCs globally. Leveraging UNDP Sustainable Energy Hub, we are directly supporting energy transition and access in line with countries' commitment. One of our priorities as UNDP is to speed up investment in distributed renewable energy solutions, especially for those in the hardest to reach and in crisis contexts. Through an all of UNDP initiative to accelerate the clean energy transition and close the energy access gap, we will work with UN energy members and leverage the comparative advantage of our respective organizations to build capacity, to accelerate action on the ground, and to deliver on our UN energy pledge and help to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. This is a unique opportunity to actively make bold choices or brave choices that will define the well-being of people and the planet for generations to come, and we look forward to support the countries and to work together as one UN. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Boussard, for those remarks. So now let's switch gears and talk to our panel of experts. Our first of two discussions today is on accelerating action on the ground. So right now, I'll hand it over to the moderator for this event, Tarek M. Taira, Director of the Energy Department at UNIDO. Over to you.
Thank you, and good day to all of you. I was going to say good morning, but we are entering into the noon time. But also good day to all the participants joining us online into this UN system-wide event on energy at the COP27 from Sharm el-Sheikh. And it gives me great pleasure to be with you and to moderate this first discussion segment. As mentioned by Dr. Khalida Boussard in terms of the opening remarks, making reference to the global roadmap of action to accelerating SDG7 action that was adopted at the UN High-Level Dialogue on Energy and issued by the Secretary General. There were five pillars that we underpin this roadmap: closing the energy access gap, rapidly transitioning to decarbonized energy systems, mobilizing predictable and adequate finance, leaving no one behind on the path to net zero, and of course, the fifth one is harnessing innovation, technology and data as a part of the enabling environment. So these are important pillars, and I think I wanted to start the conversation by framing the action in relations to these five pillars. Maybe we will not cover all of them, but we will just try to tackle one or two of these pillars in the first discussion panel. And I'm pleased to be joined by Ms. Miriam Hinostroza. I hope I got it right now. Senior Program Management Officer from the United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP. And Miriam is based in Copenhagen. And also joining me is Ms. Fatima Denton. Am I saying it correct? Director of the UN University Institute for Natural Resources in Africa. And Fatima, you're based in? Based, yes. yeah, in Accra. And the third panelist, I'm not sure, is able to join us. Mr. Mustafa Kamal, is he with us? No, okay. Well, fantastic. Maybe this will give us a chance to have even a deeper discussion with my two fellow panelists here on this. And I think it's a good way to kickstart by inviting both of you to give us a sense of, from the perspective of your agency and the scope of mandate that you are working with, sort of how are you catalyzing action on the ground in relations to any of the pillars that I mentioned, the 5 pillars of the global roadmap for accelerating SDG7. So let me start with Ms. Miriam, if I can invite you to jump in.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, those here and also those watching us online. Thank you again for to be part of this panel. I'm actually not probably familiar face in the UN Energy. I have been preceded by Mark Rakta and John Christensen before, who you know very much. And well, I am here just to say a few words about what UNEP is doing in the area of energy. You know, many agencies have joined the work on energy and in contributing on the SDGs, and we have the proof of this that some colleagues of mine are here. So I think we've been asked to respond what key challenges still remain in regards of those measures to be implemented or actions related to SDG7. And probably many of my colleagues will say the same. I'm not going to say anything new, but I think the main challenge that still exists in all countries is policies and regulations, but those still needed to be supported by a robust science foundation. And essential for providing both the context and the framework for accelerated action. Although great progress obviously have been made in this area, many countries are still lacking conducive policy frameworks for SDG7 implementation in general and for energy efficiency in particular. So UN is uniquely placed to provide support to countries in developing, implementing, and sustaining such policies. And the proof of this is this side event we are having on DESA and in general UN Energy trying to implement this roadmap. So what good practices I can show or I can share from UNEP? Maybe it's not very known from you, but through UNEP has been running a big program which is called United for Efficiency. And through this, UNEP works to help countries implement an integrated policy approach to enable a sustainable and cost-efficient transformation to energy-efficient lighting, equipment, and appliances. So many times this area, at the very end of the chain perhaps, is not very much paid attention, but there is a lot of work taking place with support from UNEP. So this is to support country-specific activities, and United for Efficiency develops global tools and resources, including model regulations, sustainable public procurement specifications, guidance on financial mechanisms and business models. Activities also include regional harmonization for lighting standards and national projects in several countries to develop minimum energy performance standards, as well business models and communication campaigns. Recently, UNEP, United for Efficiency has finalized a very important assessment they do on country-saving assessments. And this has been done for 156 countries. And these studies are showing economic, climate, and social benefits on energy-efficient appliances and equipment. So statistics don't lie, and you know that globally over 50% of electricity consumption is comprised of end-use products under United for Efficiency, such as room air conditioners, electric motors, and lighting. This assessment highlights a critical opportunity for addressing climate action and energy crisis, of course. So some numbers I can share is that globally the savings highlight that over 910 terawatts hour of electricity consumption and 820 million tons of CO2 could be saved annually in 2040 for developing and emerging economies. And this is equivalent to removing 416 large power stations, or more than the local current consumption of Chile or Turkey combined. These electricity savings would also save consumers over 130 billion annually on electricity bills. So United for Efficiency has been very proud of saying this, has been awarded as the winner of the Global International Solid State Lighting Alliance. So this is the award for 2022. And in particular, it has been awarded for standardization and application of policies. So this award is one of the highest honors to recognize contribution and achievement in large solid state lighting field. So this is what the team in United for Efficiency is doing in the area of savings. But there is also a number of other country-based activities and projects. For example, in Pakistan, the United for Efficiency team is implementing the delivery of delivering the transition to energy efficient lighting in residential, commercial, industrial, and outdoor sectors. And there is a number of activities being implemented in the country, and it's really, really changing the market in the country, but also policies and the way how they should be doing these activities in Pakistan. It includes doing the first ever minimum energy performance standards, for example, and they are developing the recommendation for sustainable public procurement in street and office building lighting. They are developing a mandatory and common labeling scheme for LED lighting products, and also conducting capacity building, because obviously national experts need to be trained on these new things. There is examples also from Turkey. I don't know if you would like to take a second round, or I continue? All right, so I stop here for now. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. No, I think you highlighted two dimensions of actions that are very important, where the UN system could effectively actually drive change and delivers of change through influencing the transformation in the energy system, and to deliver on all these 5 pillars. You outlined perhaps the global mechanism that are needed. You mentioned global tools, the sort of consensus building on standards and energy performance standards example as an example, but also translating this to policy and capacity building on the ground. And I will come back to you maybe with another question to exemplify some of the best practices we're seeing. But for now, I want to turn to Fatima and the UN University Institute. And from your domain of influence, where do you see action is happening on these pillars that we talked about?
Thank you very much. So the United Nations University is seen and known as a knowledge institute. So we're looking at this from the perspective that there is a lot of production of knowledge that would support our energy systems, but also support some of the solutions that we want in terms of energy efficiency. But a lot of that knowledge is fragmented. So we're coming in from a meta-analysis perspective to really see how we can pull all the knowledge together. My institute is based in Ghana. It has an Africa-wide mandate. And we're looking to see basically how we support countries in Africa towards using their resources in a sustainable manner, natural resources. So we're making several assumptions. We're basically saying that even as we're pushing and gearing towards net zero, we feel that the most important question that we have to ask is not a why question, it's a how question. How we get to net zero matters. Who defines net zero? Matters related to the orientation of net zero. matters related to Africa's resources, especially countries that are very rich in terms of hydrocarbon resources. How are these countries going to adopt and plan for net zero? One of the assumptions that we're making is that a lot of new demand for energy is going to come from the global south. And Africa is going to be one region where this demand is going to be even more important. We're also making the assumption that net zero is not signposted. None of us have an idea of how we get there. So what we need to do basically is to say, how do we work from, not research necessarily, but from policy? So we're looking to see how we take 5 to 10 of the most compelling policy-related post-carbon challenges, especially in the energy sector, and turn that into action and solutions. And we're basically saying that we're doing this because the infrastructure is not in place that would allow us to get to net zero. The level of preparedness is not there. Many of us talk about it, as I said, in very fragmented ways. But our infrastructure in terms of research infrastructure, policy infrastructure are not in place. So it's a huge challenge of how do you actually coalesce towards net zero. So we're basically trying to say, through an initiative that we call After Carbon, and After Carbon is essentially about how you bring policymakers on the table towards thinking about some of the most challenging issues that they haven't been able to resolve. Some of these issues might be related to new energy resources like hydrogen, but particularly around the problems of hydrogen, around problems related to transport, around problems related to marketability, around problems related to cost. How do we do all of this? But beyond that, we're basically looking at 2 other sectors that have very high energy inputs, that is agriculture and cities. And we're saying that all of these things would matter. So this is like a matchmaking service where we're bringing across a platform, we're bringing policymakers together, we're bringing researchers together, and we're bringing private sector together. And we're looking at questions that are, as I said, challenging questions on energy, on cities, and on agriculture. And hopefully, by trying to resolve those problems within the platform, we will get to the responses faster. And because it's coming from the policy perspective, then the ability to really, take in those solutions would be at least higher. Because we feel that if we want to wait for the NDCs, it will take too long. We believe that the NDCs right now might need implementation legs. And there's a lot of good stuff in the NDCs, I'm not knocking it, but it's just that at the moment, some of it is too ambitious. And we now need to get to a faster response strategy. So that's one. The second thing we're doing is an initiative that we're looking at the informal sector and how the informal sector could be brought more, I would say, centrally within the energy supply and demand, consumption and production. The fact is that the informal sector is a very important purveyor of jobs. And we feel that if the informal sector is brought in properly, then it could be a really good litmus test of how we do green transition. We could model on the informal sector. We could learn from the informal sector because a lot of what they need is based around energy. And the methods of energy, the energy sources are the energy sources that we want to move away from. So bringing the informal sector might give us that sort of scalar effect and might help us in terms of understanding how green jobs can be created with informality at the center stage, and how energy efficiency also can be arrived at, still using informal routes. So that's another important initiative that we're doing, and basically trying to see how we create new jobs, how we move towards green industrialization. Because the big push in Africa is that every country in Africa has got industrialization on their agenda. Most of the industrialization that they're looking at is the old style of doing industrialization, and we can't afford that because the time is ticking. The third initiative that we're working on is on stranded assets. This is important for us because most of what Africa needs in terms of moving towards a transition is around carbon-intensive sectors. So Africa needs more steel, it needs more aluminium, it needs to be able to produce cement. All of these are in the hard-to-abate sector. And even as we talk about that, many countries that are very hydrocarbon dependent do not see any other options but relying on their hydrocarbon sector. Because this is where they get their revenue from, this is where they get their job creation from. And even in this context, they've been pushed out because of fiscal problems, COVID, et cetera, et cetera. So stranded asset is not going to go away, but it's important that Africa does have a plan of how it manages its way, out of this exit of fossil fuel resources. So we're basically trying to see what are the economic implications of stranded assets for many countries in Africa, and how do we factor the economic implications within a managed transition? Because we're saying that the transition will not happen overnight. It will depend on the speed, it will depend on the capacity, it will depend on infrastructure, on resources, but it would also depend on planning, so that these countries could begin to think about ways of diversifying their resources outside stranded assets and outside hydrocarbon resources. So I'd say in a nutshell, so that I don't go too much into detail because there are other people waiting to speak, that these are some of the things that we're talking about, but it's centrally linked to the fact that we can talk about all of these till the cows come home, and we can't do it if we're not thinking about it from the perspective of a just transition. And just transition is not going to happen if we don't take into account critical aspects like climate finance, that those things are very much related. And Africa's situation is very much about its development. So it is not fair that this region has been asked to forego its resources so that it saves the planet. There are other things that are equally important that it wants to get to, like food and energy security. So I'll leave it there for now.
Well, thank you, Fatima. You have touched on key action levers that connect also the dots on the different tracks of delivering on the roadmap. I mean, because if you are looking at closing the energy gap and leveraging knowledge institutions, you mentioned about the issue of fragmented knowledge out there, and the role that you can play in bringing coordinated processes to understand, first of all, the dynamics that is happening because of the energy transition, relevant to the context that is Africa facing. Particularly, you mentioned also that a lot of the energy demand will happen there. There is an issue with net zero anxiety as it matters to growth in industrialization. How do we get to that pathway of industrial development and meeting the demand for this industrial growth through sustainable and low carbon energy? And I like the point that you mentioned about bringing a segment that is somehow tend to be ignored in the debate on the energy supply demand nexus, particularly the informal sector, and how to leverage their role and capacities. Important pillars to think about. And I think this also resonates well with some of the work we do, and I think this kind of dialogue we do with our sister institutions, I call them, within the UN system-wide, helps us also to think forward in terms of how we synergize to make the collective efforts even more impactful between within the broader role that the UN system can play. I want to come back to you, Mariam, on one point. From what you have described in terms of actions and interventions, where do you see some of these good examples that we can replicate, really take to scale?
Thank you again. I would like to go back to something interesting that Fatima mentioned that is very common to all developing countries, informal sector. But in the informal sector, if we go in depth and see where the opportunities are again in the appliances, in the equipments. And we have this very interesting activity on motors in Turkey, for example, where we are promoting energy efficient motors in small and medium-sized enterprises. So we need to see where these opportunities are. That at the end, you collect all the activities in informal sector, and you can make the volume you need to see the impacts on SDGs, especially in the efficiency side. So, as I said, in Turkey, working with motors, it includes eco-design requirements for electric motors and available speed drivers, upgrade the Turkish standards institution. So we also engage local institutions in this work. Recently, the team has launched the COSGIV Energy Efficient Electric Motors Replacement Support Program. And this is something that stakeholders, including the government in Turkey, are very much embracing and also welcoming the support. We also have the accelerating the energy transition to an efficient refrigerator and freezer market in Chile. So cooling is obviously another opportunity, including, again, for the informal sector. And this includes revised national minimum energy performance standards. You know, many countries don't have these standards in place. And there is more interest also actually from these activities being replicated or proliferated in the region. It's raising the interest of governments in the region. But this is something that could be also, and is a need, and I am sure that in African continent there are many activities related to refrigeration and cooling.
Thank you very much. These are very excellent examples. What I can also take from this is, because you highlighted at least the project in Turkey as a outstanding or as an example that could be replicated, and I want to take from that is where you're intervening in the system, even at the level of influencing upstream product design, so that actually when you go downstream, you end up with a much more efficient product. So influencing even the manufacturers' mindset, the designers, the product specification. So also highlighting where the levers of change in a system where we can be more effective by supporting member states in catalyzing change, particularly I always think that upstream design influences are crucial and critical. That's one key point. Thank you very much, and I want to go back again to Fatima because you highlighted a broad range of issues. But if you were to look at the levers of change from the work that you have done, where do you see the most impact coming when you interact with policy? Is it about knowledge? It's about bringing consensus? Where do you see interesting examples that we could sort of move forward with and replicate?
Yeah, I think knowledge is a critical weapon in addressing a lot of the problems that we're facing now. And that's not to say there isn't knowledge, but it's just that the knowledge is very, very fragmented. So having an organization or partners that are able to bring that sort of meta-analysis together in ways that policymakers can draw from that, I think is very important. So we see that as a key area of intervention. But again, it also has to align with what you do with policymakers, because a lot of the solutions we're talking about are not going to really allow us to get to the big major transformation without policy. You know, so policy for me is the essential glue that holds it all together. And for that to happen, you need to really talk to policymakers. You need to really have some sense of dialogue. And often it's difficult because the context doesn't often allow you to be able to sit and negotiate and discuss with policymakers, because we're all lived in parallel silos. Researchers are doing their thing, policymakers are doing their thing. And that's why this After Carbon initiative is interesting for us, because, as I said, it's a consortium of these different stakeholders coming together and working towards a solutions platform to find ways of bringing solutions to the table.
Thank you. Thank you for hammering the idea of policy again and again. I think, indeed, I mean, without robust institutions and policy frameworks, much of the ability to transform on a large scale the systems would be very difficult. So I think I reached the limits of my time here. We have had listened to at least two agencies, and I briefly mentioned some of the work that UNIDO does on industrial, the nexus between industrial transformation and energy supply or energy access. I would like to transition to the next panel and invite Minoru Takeda to take us to to moderate the next part of the conversation on this topic. Minoru, the floor is yours. Shall we stay up here or our panel move down?
Elizabeth, how are you? I did, yes. Nice to see you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Good afternoon, everybody. I have some slides. I don't know whether we can also look at it here. Nadine, can you flip over? Thank you. So we are getting to the midpoint of 2030 agenda. You know that, right? Next year, it's going to be just 7.5 years. So there will be a global sort of, on the stock taking of progress toward SDGs as well in 2023. Obviously, in the COP process, there's another global stock taking going on around that time. So it's a 2023, in a sense, it's a pivotal year. Now, looking at sort of energy situation is a very challenging situation right now, curious, both from the SDGs broadly, and of course, this net zero emission that we are also trying to get onto, and all of them are affected by the current crisis that are happening. Next slide, please. So the SDG7, it's a little too small. I'm so sorry for the audience, but there are sort of 5 indicators we have been keeping track of. There are what we call SDG7 indicator custodians. Some of the members here are actually doing that function as well to keep track of. The first one is electricity access. So the target is to get to the universal electricity access by 2030. But we're making a progress, I would say, globally speaking, but still over 700 million people do not have access to electricity now. And as it stands now, we will probably not able to achieve universal access to electricity by 2030. Next one is clean cooking solutions, access to clean cooking solutions. Still over 2 billion people have no access to clean cooking solutions. Are we making good progress? I don't think so on this one. This is going to be an utter failure by 2030, unless something dramatically changes. I want to hear the panel members. They have enormous knowledge base how to change this ball game. I think the renewable energy, this is an interesting story in that on one hand, we hear a lot about renewable energy, but if you look at as part of the global share, still it is relatively small. So I hope that Elizabeth will be able to tell a little more sort of deeper stories as to how to get there. And this is, of course, a long-term trajectory to get to the net zero. Everybody accept that renewable is at the heart of energy transitions moving forward on that. I think Marianne touched upon quite a bit on the energy efficiency. It is improving, but not nearly enough, right? And there are several sort of specific sectors, subsectors that we really have to dive into. Tarek sort of highlighted already on those things. And then the financing support to developing countries, of course, needs to be doubling, tripling. But the current situation is not helping us on that. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is yet smaller ones. Apologies. Before we get to the midpoint, we had a series of international milestones. SDG7 was first reviewed in 2018 to take stock of where things stand, resolved to do better. 2021, General Assembly convened the high-level dialogue energy, which Tariq talked about it. Outcome of that was the Secretary General's global roadmap for accelerated SDG7 action, supported by a series of energy compacts. There are voluntary contributions and commitments by all kinds of stakeholders. Now, 2023 here. Okay, getting to that, we'll have SDG summit to come up, but also SDG7 will be again reviewed at the UN next year in July. So yet another opportunity here. So can we do something unique and different and meaningful next several months? And we showed you already where we stand on many of the SDGs. And I'll give my take, obviously, before I open the panel members. But I want panel members to be free and bold in answering and providing some ideas. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think global roadmap, there are several elements of that, from access, renewable, efficiency, and of course, repeating Secretary General's call for phasing out fossil fuel subsidies and coal power. All those things are part of the global roadmap. And then, of course, these need to come hand in hand with achievement of SDG 7. Next slide, please. I mentioned voluntary commitments. There are a lot of discussion about voluntary commitments, accountability, Secretary General's high-level panel on net zero emissions, the commitments by non-state actors. You have seen the report coming out of it, calling for the end of greenwashing. And I think we will, of course, have to do much better in keeping track of the initiative and the voluntary commitments that are placed to support climate action and, of course, SDG 7 moving forward. Next slide, please. Here are sort of some of the areas of focuses of the UN Energy Plan of Actions. But then, this is something that to support realization of global roadmap and SDG 7. So I'll stop here in terms of presentation and open up a conversation here. Okay. So given where we stand, what do we need to do in the next 7.5 years? Because 7.5 years will come very soon. Right? 2050, which is sort of dominant time framework that we are looking at here, but SDG does have a much sort of shorter time framework. My personal worry is that if we don't accelerate on the SDG 7 some key elements of it, particularly access, this may be potentially a forgotten topic. So this is my real worry. So what should we do the next 7.5 years? Because this will drive back the processes next 1 year or so for us to be able to sort of create a momentum. We need realization and awareness, which I think generally have not. Momentum will have to be built. Resources needs to be brought together to be able to deliver on the implementations. All of them needs to be coming together, but based on what we are seeing, this is sort of a little uneven right now. Let me start with Elizabeth. Any wisdom?
Yeah, thank you for putting me on the spot, Minoru. I don't think I can dispense wisdom, but let me share a few thoughts. I'm from the International Renewable Energy Agency, and this is with renewables being the centrality of this process. There are some interesting areas where we can make a difference, and I think we can do it fast. So one, we need to look for multiplier solutions. So we cannot take one thing at a time. And that has to be not only in the approaches, but also in conversations. So just to give you a very specific example, for instance, the health sector, just an anecdotal aside, we were working with one of the governments in Africa, and what happened was, like, they have this rural electrification problem, and the health facilities, basically, they don't count on energy because it's not their mandate to look at health, and the energy ministry doesn't have them on their radar. So it's somehow in a budgetary gap. And it was very instructive to actually work on this because it's energy, but you also see that there's a structural problem because of the way the renewable energy is deployed. It is a different system, and we actually don't know how this works. I mean, obviously we know how technology works, but we don't have the infrastructure, institutional infrastructure to manage it. And really, it's a structural issue. So I think we need to have a lot more conversation across sectors to bring this understanding and understand renewable energy as a multiplier solution. it goes hand in hand with renewables and with efficiency, and it cannot be one without another, because we're going to be chasing our tail if we just look at the growing capacity without understanding how it works. And that brings me to a second point, that energy needs to be looked at as a service, not as a commodity. It's not about how many tons of this or gigawatts of this. It's about what do we need it for. And that's also a change of how we think and address energy. And then the last point that I want to make is that we constantly have this conversation around investment. And just to give you one number, in last 20 years, about $3 trillion was invested globally in renewables. And just like to guess how much of it went to Africa, 60 billion. I mean, I was truly shocked when I saw the number, 60 billion over 2 decades. And 75% of these 60 billion went to 4 countries. So something is terribly wrong, because we're talking about leapfrogging and change and this and that or whatever, and then when you look at these things, you see something doesn't work properly. And one of the key issues is that renewable energy projects are small and medium size, and we need to do a lot more work on, one, making sure that people understand how to actually get this project to financing stage, and secondly, to find different solutions because this is not the private sector finance at scale. They're looking for huge infrastructure projects, and these are the small things. So we need to also empower the local banks to give loans, and there's a different way of doing things, and we need to start doing this very quickly, because there's a very strong business case, there is a strong socioeconomic case, and we just need to start to change this financing aspect to also empower the financing sector to contribute to the thing.
So just to follow up on that, the 60 billion, 4 countries, which 4 countries? What are 4 countries in Africa?
The 4 countries is South Africa, Morocco, I think Nigeria, and one more, Kenya.
Kenya. Very predictable. Yeah, but it's an enormous inequity involved in these financing discussions. You're right. Thank you so much. Dario, what's your perspective? What we need to do to accelerate the progress next 7.5 years?
Thank you, Minoru. Let me pick up your indicators and tell you what we're doing and what we will continue doing on the basis of those indicators. In the UNECE region, we cover North America and the whole of Europe, the ex-Soviet Union, Central Asia, Turkey. So it's a bit different, obviously, from my sister organizations. And the indicators which are of relevance to us is basically 3, I would say, out of those that you showed. Of course, we'll look at other different things as well, but of the 6 indicators or 5 that you mentioned, 3 are very relevant for us. First of all, the penetration of renewable energies. I think we host what we call the hard talks with countries. So countries, they need to request us. Of course, we intervene if the countries want to move into that direction, and we host hard talks where we look at what is their policy strategy, what is the renewable energy penetration in those countries, and we help them implement legislation to increase that percentage of renewable energy. My region is rich of fossil fuel producers. There has been progress because we do this on a yearly basis. There is some progress. There has been. It's too slow, as you correctly said, even in the region where we work. So we continue pushing for that. We see that as a part of a larger interplay of technologies. And for that, we have elaborated the carbon neutrality toolkit, which is, you mentioned a lot, one of the speakers previously said policies, policies, and policies, where this is a practical tool to support policy making at political level, of which is the mix of technologies that each country, net carbon technologies, low carbon, zero carbon technologies, and low carbon technologies, they should adopt on the basis of the natural endowment industrial policy, industrial infrastructure for some of them, and to bring them and show how they can reach their 2050 objectives. So that these are two clear, very actionable actions, very practical things that we're doing, and for us here is to double up, actually. It's to bring a lot more countries to do this, to disseminate. The carbon toolkit is used now by 10 countries in our region. We have 56 countries, but obviously they are very different. So 10 countries have took up the toolkit, and we had done 5 or 6 of these hard talks. We want to continue doing that with the member countries. Let me go to another one. Climate finance. Here we're not alone, because here we did a global exercise that we did with this year with our sister organizations, whether it's East Africa, whether it's Western Asia, ESCAP, or ECLAC, all of them. So what we did is we all noticed that there is a bridging, there is a gap between financial resources which are available and the projects which are looking for financial resources. So what we try to do is to create a platform for visibility. So each one of the regions looked at a number of projects, discussed and worked with project sponsors, with the governments, of course. These are all governments, however, supported projects. And then we brought them forward to the compendium of about the top 50 projects across to support the transition. And that was published 2 days ago, the 9th of November, at a high-level meeting that was taking place here at COP. And so now the follow-up on that one is to continue working and working with financiers, bringing those projects forward and bridging that number that you showed in terms of investments in the region. What is true for Africa is true for us in the sense that investments have increased over the period of time that we looked, but they mostly went to fossil fuel production, unfortunately, and we want to reverse that trend and then make sure that those investments will go into renewable energy. But this is an example of what we can do at United Nations and at regional commissions working all together in supporting the flow of climate finance or financial flows towards investments in that region. Let me give you the third example. We talked about energy intensity, no? There is a decrease in the energy intensity per GDP unit. Yesterday we published a very important brief on the industries which is called with emissions hard to abate. You know, cement, steel. We have a very industrialized region. Our region is very much industrialized with the traditional industries, steel, iron, cement, metal, and some of our countries are heavily industrialized, and therefore we are concentrating our efforts in those industries which account all of them collectively, what we call hard to abate, for almost 75% of the industrial emissions. We're not talking about excluding power. And so it's extremely important to work on those industries, and we published this brief where it gives guidelines and supports and examples and on the basis of the carbon circularity economy principle of how you can abate those industries, the emissions of those industries. And obviously abating emissions in those industries, you will lower as well the energy intensity, because that's the whole purpose, is not only to switch around fuels, but as well to lower the energy intensity in those industries. So these, Minoru, are very concrete examples of solutions, practical solutions for policy making, for member states in our country, but obviously available to the whole world, because they are totally free and totally available on our website for whoever, and support as well from our group of experts with whom we work in delivering this. This is not UN stuff. This is experts from all over the world, from United States, emerging markets, everywhere, that contribute to elaborate these technical documents, these technical methodologies to support the transition. And so that's a concrete example I wanted to give you. So you asked me what we need to do. What we need to do, continue doing this. It has been proven to be a solution. Now we need, of course, to double up the efforts and increase and enlarge our scope. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of good tools available, definitely. The Radia, over to you.
First, welcome in my region, and Egypt, the host country of the COP, and hopefully next year also in our region. Maybe the startup is the mandate of our institution, which whatever we implement or support our state is through, it should be inclusive, social, economic, and environmental. Number two is the, not only the 2030 agenda, but the action roadmap that we did under the UN Energy, and I think the work that our organization contribute in the framework of the high-level dialogue on energy, which obviously defined what we can qualify as enabling the just inclusive energy transition, not only for the most vulnerable, but also those who could be left behind, the oil and gas producers. So from my region perspective, we take it from the pillars that define the way that energy is an enabler. We do have still 40 million people who do not have access to electricity. We still have a region impacted by conflict continuously, so the issue of affordability, reliability, and reliability is a major concern. Number two as well is that the access is mostly focused in rural area versus urban, but also less developed countries. We do have Sudan, Mauritania, Comoros, and several in the African continent, but also in Yemen, for example, with slave conflict. And obviously, the indicator that you presented, Minoro, from our regional perspective, although we are above the global average in terms of energy access and access to clean fuel and technologies, but in terms of energy efficiency, we are at the lowest level compared to the global average, but also compared to other regions. And specifically, our intervention focus where we have a comparative advantage, and where, as a regional commission, we can add value. At the same time, for renewable energy, we see a very, I would say, the promising future for the region as an energy exporter in the coming 10 years. But obviously, we're still far behind compared to the global average at 4.6%. So these are the inspiration in terms we work with our member state, and we are running a marathon. And I just want to say that we're really running a marathon under the leadership of our executive secretary, but we have a result in the field. So we used to work at the policy and capacity building, but we went beyond that. Number one, in terms of the implementation, we continue to do our work that size of the context of our countries, be it LDCs or oil and gas producers, and the Mashik also those who live in conflict. But at the same time, we do it in an integrated approach that addresses the water, energy, food nexus, since we live in a region, one of the most water scarce, 60% of the population do not have access to reliable to water, and we are the most impacted by climate change, and we are the lowest in terms of attracting finance, less than 5% going to the LDCs, 6% even less in the adaptation. And I think already this was highlighted. So what we are doing, in terms of closing the energy access gap, in addition to what we do as a usual business, we implemented field projects following an integrated approach. The region initiative promoting small-scale renewable energy technologies in rural area that based on human-based approach, rural empowerment, but more importantly, entrepreneurship and gender empowerment. And we were able directly to impact 3,000 people in rural area in Jordan, Lebanon, and Tunisia. We are upscaling this under the leadership of the executive secretary through resource mobilization with other donors. And this helped our orientation, let's say, is that we focus on rural and we focus on the energy access in terms of looking to decentralized system and small scale, because when it's large scale, policymakers are the one, I would say, much more, I would say, in a situation to address this. In terms of energy efficiency in a very energy intensive region, we work in two pillars. Number one, the upscaling the energy efficiency in the building sector. The work focus on the how to work on financial instruments that can help to really upscale at large the investment in economic sector, but more importantly, our focus area of work with the Islamic Development Bank and countries in the region, mostly Jordan, Tunisia, and Kuwait. We managed to work on large-scale programs, but also implementation for financial instruments. Now it comes to the industry, since we are in a region oil and gas producers. We've been working with the oil and gas producers so the circular carbon economy framework under the leadership of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It was part of the T20 in 2020. And I'm glad as well that today the big announcement by His Royal Highness, the Minister of Energy, ESCWA, with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, works on establishing today announced as a regional center for advancing emissions reductions for the Arab region. It will help to really make concrete action and all what was committed from the member states, specifically that we do have today 5 countries who committed to net zero by 2050 and 2060 for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We had other announcements, but I'm just reflecting the announcement that we had that involve ESCWA. ESCWA will be the lead in the center. It will be a host in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, in terms of the, just in order to not to take too much from your time, the other work that we've been working as well is to look at to unlock finance. So the debt swap mechanism that ESCWA is promoting and working intensively with donors directly to simplify this mechanism, building also on for the experience in Latin America, like ECLAC did in the past. So we are working with donors in order to support the countries that are much more suitable to this mechanism. And the climate finance that we did with the sister organization, we come up with a really concrete project in the field, whether from oil and gas producers and others, that touches on gas flaring reduction to forest, and even others looking to natural-based solutions, for example. These are not just projects in the pipeline that we just put in Compodium, that yesterday, the day before, was submitted to the Executive Secretary for also endorsement, but we effectively are connecting the donors with the member states in order to make this project implemented in the field. So this is what we are so far doing and running the marathon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive, and congratulations on this establishment of new center. I have been hearing about it. Finally, this is real. Congratulations, particularly to you personally as well, Radia. A lot of things. I will do a next run. And then I asked first panel members to join. Tariq also can come back here to actually I'll ask a question. Yeah. So this is, we started with a scale of 7.5 years and up to 2030. I'll come back a little sort of shorter time framework next year, right? So next year, as I mentioned, SDG7 is going to be reviewed at the UN globally, and then I think regional commissions will be helping to do the same thing at the regional level as well to feed into that global review. SDG Summit will take stock and renew the commitment toward achievement of SDG for sure by heads of state. And then of course COP28 will come back to the region once again on that. Now if you look at some of the sort of key elements of the SDG7 energy agenda here, let me give an example. Fossil fuel subsidies, there seems to be a lot of pressure already being here. There's a potential instruments put forward by some. Of course, there will be more discussion to come, but I can see that there are takers, there are momentum, there are actors trying to put sort of actions to move forward, right? Core, okay, there are issues here, but I think on the midterm, this is also a subject that is being discussed and continue to have pressure and momentum to move forward, mainly linked to the net zero emissions for sure, those things. Renewable, of course, will continue to grow. Okay, efficiency, I want to hear more about how to grow efficiency, right? Access, partly thanks to renewable, decentralized thing, it is growing, but not nearly sufficient. I'm not too sure whether renewable as such only satisfies Africa's growth needs, for example. Clean cooking, I don't know who is taking. So I'm asking you to see what sort of political push or decisions or action you want to see realized or announced within the next 12 months. So this is my question. Who wants to take, but I'm going to go anyway. Elizabeth.
Thanks, Minoru. couple of things. One, I think there's a lot of announcements. I think we need to start looking at accountability of some of the announcements. So I think it's really important to hold all these people accountable for what they have said in the past. We had the turmoil, we are having a turmoil in the energy system at present that is kind of trickling over to other sectors, and we also understand very well how important it is to maintain medium and long-term focus while the short-term priorities are managed. So on our part, it's absolutely critical to start showing real progress in some of these things. So a couple of days ago, I'm really happy that last year we announced the Energy Transition Facility, the accelerator, and we actually managed to get $1 billion, which we launched a couple of days ago. Yesterday, the philanthropists announced $500 million of assistance for Africa for next 3 years. There has to be a real action and accountability in what's happening on the finance side. On the broader strategy side, we really need to pay attention at hard to abate sectors, the industry. I mean, when you look at the totality of energy, how it's moving, the power sector is on the way. In some ways, it's unstoppable from the emission perspective, if you wish, because the business case is strong and it's going to happen one way or the other. Whether it's going to happen in time, that's a different story. But the hard to abate sectors, again, this is where political leadership is needed, because in order to move the private sector, especially looking, these are transcontinental, huge companies with very complex supply chains, there needs to be, each country needs to have a political commitment and the measures in place that will create demand for green commodities and reinvent the hard to abate sectors. I think that's really, without that we will not be able to manage the climate crisis, going beyond what needs to happen in the next 3 to 4 years for development.
Very good. Tariq, you want to say something? Yes. Okay, go ahead.
I think we've been talking about finance quite extensively and for many years, but I think I wanted to echo the same conversation that we have had 2 days ago on the scale and amount of development finance that is needed. I think there's not enough attention, because we've been saying we understand that the private sector needs to step in, but actually it's like a chicken and egg kind of situation. Institutional environments or enabling environments are not present in many countries, particularly in the global south. And in that context, without really, and if these countries wants to borrow to build the critical infrastructure for massive amount of energy, they always face with the problem of the cost of capital. So when we discuss everywhere we go, it's the cost of capital that is one of the key barriers. So without really a global commitment to increase the volume of concessional finance that brings the cost of capital down, because private sector, even when they come, they're going to price the risk at a higher premium than anywhere else, especially if you do projects in Africa or in some parts of Africa, not necessarily all of it, but so pricing of risk will always be there. So I think the global community needs to really address this issue. We're not talking about the climate finance, the $100 billion, that's not enough. We're talking about massive amount of concessional through the multilateral infrastructure, multilateral finance, concessional finance that really reduce the amount of the cost of capital to do the kind of scale infrastructure investment that is needed. Because also some of these infrastructure projects need to be at the not only at the country level, but if you want to deploy 100% renewables, for example, interconnections will be vital and important. And when however you look at it, these interconnections are infrastructure investment that have a lot of risk associated with them, and you need to bring to manage the risks. So this is fundamentally a conversation that has to be picked up and taken forward and looked at. Africa has, if you look at the Africa Development Bank, deploys $10 billion. That is a drop in an ocean to get the right amount of infrastructure needed for the clean energy transition. So I think that argument needs to be pushed forward in the next 10, 12 months.
I just want to have 30-second contribution to your point, Tariq, because what's also we talk a lot about enabling frameworks, but what really stuns me is that the fossil fuel projects somehow don't need enabling frameworks. Somehow capital is there. So I think while we need to look at how to attract that to the renewables and related infrastructure, we also need to look at why is it so simple for fossil fuel projects to go forward in the most of the unstable places, in the most of the complicated areas without enabling frameworks. So I think there's two sides that need to be tackled.
Exactly.
But I can answer. I can answer that very simply because the oil companies that have been investing in that sector for 70 years, they have skills, they know how to manage projects, and they have liquidity. Correct. You need to do exactly the same. You need to build those capacities in the rest. So you need to build the technical and project management capacities for renewables, and then bring a capital markets towards renewables.
Dario is from the private sector originally, and I can see that that are definitely on this, fascinating. But I come back to the Elizabeth's point, original point a little bit, right? So I was hearing that somebody saying that we may need a bit more like an accountability summit. In that, we need to raise this accountability issue a little bit higher on the profile, and then, be able to push and make accountability happen. But I don't know the content of that. So maybe somebody can shed some more light on this issue related to accountability. But I hear a lot more about these accountability issues, definitely. Let me go to Dario. You spoke a little bit, so maybe I'll go there.
To reflect on the oil and gas sector, since I came.
Ladia, question is not about fossil fuels projects, and you can comment on it definitely. on that.
Yeah.
But I want you to tell us a little bit about next 12 months. In addition to establishing your center, what do you want to see happen next 12 months?
I think first coming from the de-risking investment, the issue that people there is a lack of inclusiveness, but also reverse knowledge from the oil and gas sector, and always I say that because I come from the sector. If I take the hydrogen industry, huge similarity between the hydrogen and the gas industry. And I feel why people compete. I need to learn I'm an engineer, that I studied in the industry, petrochemicals, and then I went to the renewable energy sector. And I can tell that I brought my expertise from the sector to the other sector. And the problem that the two sectors are not communicating, when the oil and gas sector have a huge potential to really create a business model in terms of management, in terms of skills, in terms of project management, and in terms of de-risking of investment at scale. And in terms of governance, because the corruption mostly exists and still in the oil and gas sector at all levels. So if we move to more sustainable systems, we need also to address first not the problem of finance that can come, but as long as we didn't address the governance and accountability, we've done nothing. Now in terms of upscaling, so we speak about renewable energy. Now from a business perspective, hydrogen can be similar to the gas industry, but renewables, this now you need really regional collaboration, and you need regional markets. And the regional markets in certain regions and where you have the issue of access is not there. And you have an issue of really addressing the transparency, creating the infrastructure, and we do have an issue of having finance directly to the huge infrastructure needed for electrification in where we have an issue of access, like in the African continents. This is number one. Number two, and this is private sector, will not address all of it because we are speaking about large investment. The private sector will come to, obviously, look at the development project, but not on the big infrastructure. We need really finance and need collaboration, bilateral collaboration. And always I say in the gas industry, I always say the gas is not like oil. It's about marriage and not dating. So if you exactly for renewable energy, it's about marriage and not dating. So it's a long-term relationship that's built on sustainability, and that's why the regional markets, where the gas markets didn't really succeed in certain regions to be regional, the regional market in the renewable energy through the electricity interconnection, you have the potential. And I don't know, you had a question on the emissions. One of the elements, just to indicate that there are concrete actions now, 21% of the investment in the MENA region are in hydrogen, 50% in renewables when it comes to the sustainability programs, okay? I don't want to give figures that maybe have changed as we speak now, but you will see in the coming 5 years, the capacity that's coming from this region in renewables and hydrogen, I don't want to speak about the color, it's clean hydrogen, then obviously they will come from this region because they have the potential and they have the expertise in the oil and gas sector. So it's only just put in sustainable way. But, and that's why, to adjust what's just indicated on what's need to be reoriented from a sector to another, there's a question of optimization of the resources. That's it, optimization of the resources. Optimization of the resources can only be done if you have a women's situation in your market, and that's it. Be it private sector, government institution, this is how it works.
Great. Miriam, and also I invite Fatima to say a few words, right? 2 minutes each before we close.
Yeah, I think a lot has been said already. I just want to go back to the issue of accountability that Elizabeth mentioned, especially in the energy sector, because a lot of big pledges have been made. But I think there is a misalignment between the big pledges and where the money is the most needed, especially in terms of energy productive systems. And I think, Minuru, you made the mention also that we're not seeing enough money flow into clean cooking. And that is having devastating impacts, you know, millions, I'd say, or at least 400,000, you know, lives are lost on a yearly basis as a result of respiratory-related illnesses that are really at the core of the problem, because women are suffering and their children as well. So that's a huge problem. That is something that needs to be solved. The second thing I wanted to say is we need to see more investment into some of the critical green minerals that I think are going to be very useful for scaling up, especially in terms of renewable energies. So to be able to scale up, we need more tin, more aluminium, more copper. All of those are very critical, and many of them are home to Africa. So we need to see how investment can be leveraged in a way that African countries can also take advantage of these resources. So I'd say that those two things, at least from my perspective, are very important.
Very helpful. Miriam?
I think two very concrete points. The first one is I would like to see more countries adhere to the global methane pledge. I think that's a low-hanging fruit. There have been some very big important announcements here at COP27 on that issue. If we want to have a rapid impact on emissions and this
I don't know where this is coming from.
Sorry?
I'm sorry. Oh, Dario is speaking?
Yeah. I was saying my two.
Sorry.
I know that you didn't. You did that slide. You did that. I would like to. Yeah. Well, my two questions for this year. This one and the second one would be so additional to the global methane pledge, and the second one is the adoption of the United Nations Framework Convention for the critical raw materials. So I totally agree with you. Without critical raw materials and just exploitation of those raw materials, there won't be transition and there won't be just transition. So those are my two wish lists for next year, Minoru.
Thank you. Very clear. I'm sorry that I didn't see you behind that.
Don't worry, I don't miss.
So I would like to go back to the when it comes to the 500 million access push. So I think the 2030 agenda is the main principle is leave no one behind. So on this, I would like to mention that it is very important also to remember vulnerable groups like humanitarian settlements and see the opportunities there, not only to help with access, but also with efficiency. So including those settlements, I think UN should be helping together with, among all of us, to implement actions in these places. But also beyond these vulnerable groups and settlements, we should also include municipalities in our work. it is very important because there is a lot of action taking at the district level, and mayors are doing fantastic jobs in emerging economies, but also in small cities. So, continue looking at leave no one behind.
Very helpful. Tariq, you want to say something about your wish list for the next 12 months? You have done enough already. Thank you so much. So this comes to the end of this session. On my part, I heard a lot today, so many ideas, but let me say 3 points here. I heard accountability, I had access, and financial resources. So let's see which one to come. And Ladia, any more? Collaboration, which is the essence of this panel, UN Energy. Thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to collaborating one more time again. Bye-bye.